Pleasant morning to our viewing audience. Allow me to apologize on behalf of the Director of Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies, because regrettably, he is unable to be with us today. He was called away on official duties. However, our Acting Director, Mr. Sheldon Salino, will open proceedings. So, Mr. Salino, I invite you to give your opening remarks.
Thank you, Earl. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to all the presenters and all the participants viewing online. Let me start off by saying thank you for being part of this session this morning. As Earl said, the director is off on official duty. He's actually en route back to Trinidad as we speak. So I believe he's airborne right now on way to Trinidad. The college is pleased to be partnering in this initiative with the Emergency Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago in recognition of National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month 2023. We are all very much aware of the impact natural disasters such as flooding have on communities in Trinidad and Tobago. The topic being addressed here today, community resilience, working together to mitigate flood risk, is most timely, I must say, as we are just mere weeks away from what is anticipated to be a very severe rainy season. It is therefore vital that institutions like ours continue to inform communities about the importance of being prepared for the upcoming rainy season and the possibility of flooding. The impact of flooding is broad, as we all know. It touches us socially, economically, environmentally. We see the effects in things like everyday life, such as food security and water quality. So as a research institution focused on empowering people, the college and the association, we are interested in the impact of these events on working people and the actions as a community we can take to mitigate the effects. So I'm certain that the information shared here today will assist the individuals and communities during the impending rainy season. Additionally, we would also use this event, and I would task Ms. Archer with that, as a springboard for other initiatives within our emergency management department and to inform our academic program development. So on that note, I just want to say thank you for being here with us today and welcome. And I am sure that we're going to be exposed to some interesting discussion and information today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Salino, for your opening remarks. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining our national webinar hosted by Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies and the Emergency Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago. As mentioned earlier by Mr. Salino, today's webinar is entitled Community Resilience, Working Together to Mitigate Flood Risk. Our esteemed panel today includes Dr. Julie Samaru, Ms. Stacey Piosoria, and Colonel Dave Williams, retired, of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. In addition, our webinar wants to encourage inclusion. So for our hearing impaired audience, we have one sign language interpreter from We Care Deaf Support Network, and her name is Ms. Koshiba Lafleur. Ms. Lafleur is a parent advocate and disability consultant. She is the founder and CEO of We Care Deaf Support Network. We Care is the first registered parent support organization for parents of deaf and hard of hearing children and deaf parents. So with that said, I would like to introduce our first presenter. Dr. Julie Samaru is an adjunct lecturer in emergency management. She's attached to the Department of Security Administration and Management at the Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies. She has been presenting at Cipriani from 2009 till now. She has 14 years of lecturing experience in emergency management at Cipriani College and has collaborated with WASA, MIPAT, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, several disaster management units, where she conducted simulation exercises with students from the college. She holds a PhD in policy and administration with a concentration on emergency management from Walden University in the United States, a Master's of Science degree in risk, crisis and emergency management from Leicester University, London, and a Master's of Science degree in adult education from Walden University in the United States. She is here to present for us on flood emergency preparedness and response. So I now introduce you to Dr. Samaru. Dr. Samaru?
Could we go to the other presenter in the meantime, because I'm having some technical difficulties on this side?
No problem.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, we are experiencing some technical difficulties. So we will return to the presentation from Dr. Julie Samaru. So our next presenter is Ms. Stacian Piosoria. She is the founder of Pods Marketing Mix Limited and has 19 years, for the last 19 years, she has helped individuals, businesses, and government prepare to respond and recover and mitigate against natural and man-made disasters. Stacian's business acumen led Pods Marketing to be the first mobile shelter system and globally approved flood barrier system. Pods is also currently the premier provider of FEMA certified emergency management training to first response personnel across governments, private sectors, and NGOs. With her passion for emergency management and strong belief in giving back to society, Stacian founded the Emergency Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, whose underlying reason for being is to promote the establishment and ongoing strengthening of a vibrant disaster risk reduction culture in Trinidad and Tobago. She is here to present for us on urbanization and flood risk. Ms. Piosoria.
Very, very pleasant. Good morning to all. Please allow me to share my screen. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Again, very, very pleasant. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Okay. And I thank each and every one of you for joining EMATT and the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, where we enter into this topic about urbanization and flood risk. Why is my slide not moving? Okay. Just confirming, you're seeing my second slide?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So while I'm the presenter this morning, I really want to say thank you to Mr. James Richardson and Theodore Charles, my fellow EMATT colleagues who helped me to put together this presentation. So let's jump right in. This presentation references our capital city of Port of Spain, which is just a primary and classic example of what an urbanized city that faces perennial flooding. I referenced the local area economic profile final report submitted by Carey Consultants to the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government in 2016, where it cites that the city of Port of Spain is an administrative, political, and commercial center with a substantial central business district. It is highly urbanized with little undeveloped land, with the exception of some designated parks. There are a number of informal settlements located in East Dry River. The city is developed on a floodplain and is located at sea level. There are two rivers running through the city. That's the Maraval River on the west and the St. Anne's River on the east.
Okay, so when
Julie, would you like to mute your mic, please? Thank you. And the very last point I would like to see is that flooding in the city of Port of Spain started at backdates from 1933, which was the first flooding event in Port of Spain, which is approximately 90 years ago. 90 years ago. With a concentration of built development, heavy convectional rain events often create flooding. And I'm sure these pictures are no news to anyone. This is primary what we see year upon year around the city of Central Bank and outside City Gate. Let's look at some of the causes of this flooding. And basically, flooding could be attributed to meteorological events where we have intense and frequent rainfall and severe weather due to climate change. We cannot ignore the human contributions to flooding, and that is improper land use, unplanned or poorly planned development, and we do not cater for long-term expansion. Increase in paved and other impermeable surfaces, and sometimes we have many times sediments and debris which can further constrict the runoff and block the channels, thereby increasing flood risk. And where we are a small island developing state, having higher bouts of rain or a higher frequency of intense rainfall activity in shorter time periods, that runoff is extremely fast, contributing to this level of flooding that we experience. We have aging or poorly managed drainage systems, sanitation and waste management systems, and a lack of or inadequate flood risk management. If we look at Port of Spain, combined with hydrological events where we have the presence of high tides, this also impedes the drainage into coastal areas. Now, the extracts which you're about to see from the video I'm about to play, let me just position where I'd like the video to start. This video, So this video is the extracts is taken from a March 25th, 2022 interview with His Worship Alderman Joel Martinez, Mayor of Port of Spain. And he kind of says things, he really gives us a really good explanation of what happens when we flood in the city of Port of Spain. Just time it.
You have seen when there's rainfall in the hills of Maraval or the hills of St. Anne's, what happens to Port of Spain. This is our capital city, and imagine that the capital city has to stop when there's floods, and we have to be able to deal with that. There was an earthquake the other day, and we were quite lucky at the end of it, but you could imagine if it was worse. What kind of impact it would have been on the city of Port of Spain and for the development and the economy and livelihood of the people who live and work and travel through Port of Spain. So talking about...
Okay. So Let's look at some of the impacts of flooding on urban areas such as the cities. And a lot of these factors extend beyond Port of Spain because we now see widespread flooding across the various municipalities in our Twin Islands state in Trinidad, and even in Tobago, there's some extreme events that have been reported. The flooding is just getting worse. So we have some social impacts. So with high population density, resident and transitory, more persons definitely are vulnerable and can be affected. Environmentally, soil and bank erosion, bed erosion, siltation, or landslides. Physical impacts, of course, we have some damage to buildings and infrastructure, utility installations, housing, and of course, household assets. And with respect to financial impacts, and you will hear more from Dr. Samaru, where she will mention the amount of money, quantify the amount of money that was spent on efforts to mitigate flooding in low-lying areas as reported by the Public Sector Investment Program. Urban flooding can turn out to be more costly and very difficult to manage. Okay. Last but by no way least is the political impact. And the current and projected levels of urban flooding impacts give really a sense of urgency to the need to make flood risk management in urban areas a high priority on the political and planning agendas. Now we have a definite dilemma, and this is something that came into the equation very recently. This is, can anyone maybe help to explain why does our mayor look so worried? And I think he's asking himself, where did our floodgates go? Just imagine a floodgate weighing approximately 1 ton valued at $200,000 was stolen from the St. Anne's River in Port of Spain. With this gate missing, areas such as the Beetham Highway, Central Market, and Piccadilly can be flooded easily with heavy rainfall. So can you imagine, even with all that we're dealing with the external environment, we have citizens of this country contributing to the problem. What is going wrong, Trinidad and Tobago? So the authorities have not yet solved the problem of flooding in the city, notwithstanding the investments that have been made in recent years in building of drains to handle major runoff. Now, this diagram that appears on the screen is probably extremely confusing to you. But I'll try to talk through it and demonstrate just how much urban flooding presents a challenge to planners, not only in our country, but also worldwide. You see, the city of Port of Spain adjoins the municipalities of Diego Martin and Sao Lavantil. These areas are also prone to massive flooding and landslides. There are also 3 immediate connected stakeholders as it relates to the tackling of the issues of flooding. Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, the Ministry of Works and Transport, and the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Within each of these lies such responsibilities, including community envisioning and participation, land use planning, maintenance and permitting, the need for a drainage authority and development of structural solutions such as retention areas and evacuation planning and emergency management. It is a complex business, and an overall effective flood management in urban areas requires a comprehensive approach in building resilience. We might talk about, and we hear that word all the time, resilience. And in the same video that I would have played with our Port of Spain Mayor, Joel Martinez, in that same video, he and the director of Habitat for Humanity referred to their collaboration on making the city of Port of Spain resilient by adopting what you see on the screen, 10 essentials to making cities resilient. This is an operational framework developed by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And the operational framework stems from the Sendai framework, just drilled down to the local level. This is a checklist for resiliency and a great place for cities to start. But it involves work and it involves commitment, and it must be sustainable. My question to Trinidad and Tobago: do we have the political will? Do we have the political will? And what happens if there's a change in government? So let's look now at some strategies that we have to use in order to build the resiliency. And while it is impossible to eliminate the flood risk entirely, there needs to be a balance between common sense approaches that minimize risk and flood impact and long-term mitigation strategies. An integrated flood risk management approach is a combination of measures which, taken as a whole, can successfully reduce urban flood risk. The strategies must be able to cope with a changing environment. These include adoption and enforcement of relevant building codes, improved building design and construction, urban development control, land use planning, and regulation of new developments, year-round program of urban drainage system management, rebuilding natural ecosystems, renewed efforts towards urban greening, and resettlement of certain infrastructure to lower risk zones. And finally, develop flood forecasting capabilities for flood early warning systems. And we've probably heard some of these strategies in different forums, but what we need to do is aim for a unified and integrated strategy with all of these components. Finally, one key strategy that must not be left out of the equation is increased preparedness via awareness campaigns. We must engage and involve stakeholders and their institutions, such as this webinar, which came to fruition by two stakeholders with a vested interest, bringing their strengths to the table for the better of the national community. And for this, I say hats off to and thank you to the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. We need an all hands on deck approach. And by now, I am hoping that you understand the complexity surrounding urbanization and flood risk. I am also hoping that you agree with me when I say we need greater coordination between central and local government, public sector companies, including utilities, meteorological and planning institutions, civil society, NGOs, private sector, business sector, and research organizations. So after 90 years of flooding, do we, Trinidad and Tobago, have the national will? EMATT is doing its part in initiating change for disaster risk reduction in Trinidad and Tobago. Our vision is to become the nation's recognized voice of emergency management that advocates for and promotes disaster risk reduction as part of sustainable national development for the long-term benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. If you're so inclined to join us, please visit our website at www.ematt.org, where you can sign up and become a member of EMATT. You can also find us on Facebook at EMATT, and you can send us an email at ematt.contact@gmail.com. I thank you, and in the emergency management of Trinidad and Tobago, together with Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, we are very pleased to have contributed to the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month, themed Working Together to Mitigate Flood Risk. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Piosodia, for that wonderful presentation on flooding. And after listening to your comprehensive presentation, I will urge members of the general public to sign up and become part of EMATT. to contribute to our disaster risk reduction culture and drive in Trinidad and Tobago. And for those who have not studied emergency management, they are welcome to join the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies to learn a little more of how to deal with these situations. So thank you very much for your presentation. I would take this time to remind the viewing audience to please submit your questions. And at the end of the 3 presentations, all your questions will be answered by the presenters. So as we go forward with our webinar, I would like to check on Dr. Samaru to see if she is ready. Dr. Samaru?
It says host disabled by participant screen sharing.
Sometimes we have to keep in mind that technology can fail us at different times. So we'll be mindful of that and be very patient in getting Dr. Samaru's presentation up. If you are still having struggles, we'll move on to Colonel Williams and then we will return.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so let us move on to our next presenter, Colonel Dave Williams, retired. He has served as a commissioned officer in the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force for 34 years. He retired in 2009. Thank you very much for your service, sir. With respect to disaster risk reduction, he has been in the business for over 20 years up to this date, amassing experience in directing response operations, leading rapid need assessment teams, and adapting and developing teaching methods for disaster management subjects. He spent 7 years as the director of the National Emergency Management Agency. That was the agency that preceded ODPM, as we now have ODPM. And he spent 2 years as the Chief Disaster Management Coordinator at the Ministry of Local Government. He held appointments as the Deputy CEO at ODPM for 10 months, even after showing his variety of skills and experience. Currently, he works with Pods Marketing Mix Limited as an emergency management consultant, and he's the president of the Emergency Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, EMATT. He is here to present on community participation in flood risk reduction. Thank you very much for your presentation. I now invite you to listen to Colonel Dave Williams.
Yeah, good morning. I trust that everyone is hearing me. Stacey?
Yes,
Loud
sir.
and clear, Colonel Dave.
Okay,
Take it
great.
away.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in the disaster management business for just about 30 years now. And I'm here to understand our general response to the flood hazard. After all, the risk of flooding is ever present because of our naturally occurring rainfall. A table posted on the website of the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service shows that the mean annual rainfall for Trinidad over the past 45 years is 1,863 millimeters of rain, while in Tobago, the average is 1,475.5 millimeters, and that is for 45 years. So that one would therefore expect that if a risk is perceived not only as being real, but also as being high, there would be an acknowledged, there would be a behavior in response to that risk that demonstrates that the risk is acknowledged. And yet, year after year, we continue to see unpreparedness for the advent of the flood season that is synonymous with the rainy season and also the Atlantic hurricane season. There is also the perennial question of, are we prepared? Current emergency management doctrine holds that preparedness takes place at several levels: national, community, and at the individual household level. The previous speaker spoke to preparedness at the municipal level. This presentation will now focus on preparedness at the household or individual level. Let's bear in mind, however, that preparedness should take place not only when the threat of flood is imminent, but also long before. In terms of the disaster cycle, this means that preparedness is part of both the prevention, mitigation phase and the preparedness phase. In the management of any risk, we are told our first action should be to avoid it. Regarding the flood risk, we need to be careful in choosing where we build, avoiding flood-prone areas if at all possible. So, if we are purchasing land for the purpose of constructing a home, for example, or even to grow food, we should try to find out if the area is subject to flooding. We can then decide if we will or will not buy. Of course, there are situations where the flood hazard cannot be avoided. Here is where the question of mitigation, whether structural or non-structural, comes in. If the flood hazard cannot be avoided, we must now ask, is there anything I can do to mitigate flooding or to mitigate the impacts of flooding on me? The answer to these questions is yes. And advice is readily available. The problem is that we are not heeding the advice. So therefore, let us now review what we already know, or we at least ought to know. At the individual household level, there are a number of things that, though seemingly insignificant and often widely ignored, we can do to minimize the level of flooding that occurs naturally. In other words, mitigating the hazard itself. Not disposing of waste, especially bulky waste, in our waterways will enable them to keep their maximum capacity to contain water within their banks. Also, not engaging in the wanton removal of our tree and grass cover will slow the rate of release of rainfall from our hills and mountains, thereby reducing the buildup of water in our waterways and minimizing the likelihood of flooding. The intensity of such flooding is likely to be reduced. And these are but two examples in which, at the individual level, we can do things that will contribute to mitigating the flood hazard itself. Logically speaking, the smaller the flood, the lesser the damage should be. On the other hand, when it comes to doing something to lessen the impact of the flooding on us, there are also some structural and non-structural measures that we can take. Structural measures include building our homes on pillars or on high ground. Note, however, that while building on high ground might prevent floodwaters from entering our homes, the surrounding low-lying area will be flooded and may prevent access or egress. Another structural mitigation measure that can be employed at the individual level is in the design of the house. Reducing the number of access points through which flood water can enter our home can reduce the amount of flood water that we experience. We should therefore consider carefully how many doors there will be that give access or egress to and from the house. Careful consideration should also be given to the use and placement of ventilation and other similar type blocks. Further, keeping our guttering and drains free from garbage or grass or silt buildup, etc., will facilitate the free flow of stormwater, thereby reducing the possibility of water buildup and consequent flooding. There is also the use of flood protection measures. These include sandbags and other types of flood barriers. The use of sandbags is a tested and proven measure employed to provide protection against flooding. What is often seen in Trinidad and Tobago is the improper construction of sandbag protection, resulting in flood waters breaching the defense. This in turn results in a lessening of confidence in the ability of sandbags to provide a reasonable protection against flooding and a reluctance to make use of that option. But at this point,
good day, everyone. We at the EMATT Regional Corporation care about your safety.
This is available.
Here is a
online.
brief video on how to construct a sandbag wall to protect yourself and your family during this hurricane season. Residents can collect their sandbags at our office, which is located at 2-3 Orchid Drive, Pitti Valley.
Colonel Dave, your mic is muted.
Right. So ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you found that useful. I would like to say though that, or to add, that within recent times, a new kind of sandbag has become available for use. This new sandbag is filled with a material that swells when the bag comes into contact with water. It is easy to store and deploy. Unlike the traditional sand-filled sandbag, however, it is not reusable. However, the gel in this bag is not only biodegradable, but can also be used as plant food. Another comparatively new flood defense measure for homes is the door dam. This is an easily installed and easily removable flood barrier that is meant to be placed in doorways and other fairly narrow entrances. When used in houses designed with flood mitigation in mind, the door dam can prove to be quite cost-effective. Moving on to some non-structural measures specifically, let's review some of the other things that we can do to mitigate the impact of flooding. Again, keep in mind that we need to do some of these things long before the threat of flood looms. Among the recommended actions, hold on, why am I not getting a movement on my slide? Let's see. Okay, let's try that. Oops, all right. Oops. I seem to have a little technical problem here. All right, well, I will.
And I'll try hitting, okay, while you stop sharing.
Yeah, it's gone. So I can, in fact, I could remind I meant to remind us of some of the things that we already know, which is that we need to develop a family emergency plan, including the evacuation actions. We need to make sure that all family members know what immediate actions to take to ensure their personal safety. We must protect our important items such as passports and books and birth certificates, etc., by securing them in waterproof containers. Even putting them in multiple plastic bags would give them some measure of protection. Our area rugs and carpets can easily be removed and placed above the anticipated flood level. Food items that are packaged in paper or cardboard should also be stored in waterproof containers to prevent spoilage due to floodwaters. Finally, having flood insurance is another measure we can take to mitigate the impact of flooding on us. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's really no reason why we should be experiencing such a high level of losses to floods every year. I trust that nothing I have said is new to you because this information is widely available and has been around for some time now. We just need to follow the advice. But this brings me back to where we started. Why are we so unprepared for flooding when we know for a fact that at some point in time we will experience flooding, notwithstanding all of the information that is available? So my question is it that we simply do not take the flood risk seriously enough? And if so, why not? I am reminded of the colloquialism that says, who do hear, does feel. As I close, I would like to remind you that EMATT is about promoting a strong disaster risk reduction culture in Trinidad and Tobago. If you share a similar passion, we invite you to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Dave, for your wonderful presentation on community participation. Because it's important for us to remember that we have to do this as a community. We can't just wait on individuals to do it, but more hands on deck makes the work lighter. So before we go forward, I'd like to check on Dr. Samru to see if she's ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. And I do have to apologize for the technical difficulties experienced. And as they say, you know, Murphy is always at work. And probably Murphy wanted me to be last, as they say. He kept the best for last. So Stacey has given you an idea in terms of what happens with urban flooding and things that need to be done and addressed. Dave has given you an insight as to what you need to do on a personal level. And from those two now, I will take it as it relates to the persons or the people who will be the ones to help us prepare and respond to floods. So I'm going to be looking at preparedness and response, but let's start by looking at the disaster management cycle. The disaster management cycle consists of 4 phases. We have preparedness and mitigation that takes place before a disaster, and then we have response and recovery that happens after disaster. This morning, my presentation will focus on the 2 phases. The preparedness phase, which is before the disaster, and the response phase, which will be after disaster. And I will be looking at specifically what are the roles and responsibilities of some of the first responding agencies. Now, flooding is a primary hazard that impacts our country on an annual basis. And there were 5 notable flooding disasters occurring between 2017 and 2018, causing widespread damage. And according to the International Federation of Red Cross, in 2018, 150,000 people were affected in 4,100 households, and 75% of the local farmers affected by loss of crops and livestock. Flooding presents more cost burdens to the state when floods and landslide damage public infrastructure, and major areas that were impacted would have been property. We would have a lot of property damage because with the flood, depending on when you are located, in some instances, your entire property may be underwater. Then we have a complete destruction of the agriculture sector. Hence the reason for the increase in food prices. You will have a stoppage in commercial operations because not only will employees not be able to work, but because of the flood waters, some of the machinery in some of these manufacturing organizations, they will be damaged. And then we have significant displacement of citizens. People who are displaced in their homes or in fact cannot stay in their homes will now be accommodated in shelters. Now, throughout the country, both in Trinidad and Tobago, we have shelters, and the shelters, most of the schools are designated as shelters. And what is the result of this primary hazard of flooding? Significant financial losses in all sectors. And according to the Public Sector Investment Program, over fiscal years 2018 to 2022, approximately $5.56.7 million was spent on efforts to mitigate flooding in low-lying areas. Now, who's responsible for the coordination of disaster management in Trinidad and Tobago? I know most of you will probably know that it is the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. They are the coordinating and managing agency that places equal emphasis on all phases of disaster management. And disaster management in the country is a 3-tiered approach to response. At level 1 and level 2, it's handled by the Ministry of Local Government and the DMU. Now, in each regional corporation, we are going to have a DMU. And there are 14 regional corporations. And in each one, you're going to find that they are going to be the first responders at level 1 and level 2. At level 3, when those areas are overwhelmed, as well as the resources can no longer contain or operate at a level 1 and 2, the ODPM will step in and mobilize more of the resources to help on a nationwide scale. And this is where external assistance may be required. Now, let's look at, before we go to TEMA, let's look at what happens in level 1 and level 2. In level 1 and 2, where the DMUs will take over and handle the situations, they will be working with some of the first responders within their community. It means, let's say if we take for instance, if one community has an impact of flooding, and that can be handled by the local government within that community, they may in fact, if they're a bit overwhelmed, call in another DMU or another municipality to assist. And when they are overwhelmed, that's when the ODPM will step in and give further assistance. Now in Tobago, we have the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. And they are the coordinating agency at level 1 and level 2 in Tobago. And this agency coordinates a network of agencies and individuals. They also have a CERT groups in Tobago, and these are trained and qualified persons. Unlike where we would have in Trinidad those who may be volunteers, these persons work directly with TEMA. And TEMA within the island, they direct their efforts to ensure the maximum preservation of life and the protection of property in times of disaster. Now let's look at preparedness. What is preparedness? Preparedness consists of a set of measures undertaken in advance by governments, organizations, communities, or individuals to better respond and cope with the immediate aftermath of a disaster, whether it is human-induced or caused by natural hazards. And remember, preparedness are the actions taken before the onset of disaster. So what happens in preparedness? You've got to do threat assessments. We are dealing with flooding, so we need to have the threat assessments done in communities to see the possible damage that will occur as a result of the threat. And it means that there are some people who can be relocated or given advance notice that they should move. So during that point in time, it is to see whether this threat will become a reality. Bearing in mind, during the rainy season, we will get frequent updates on weather patterns from the meteorological office. And they will update us as to the weather patterns, whether it is going to be in terms of where we're going to have flooding, what kind of flooding is expected. Then we have to look at the resources, assessments, and the acquisition. Now we're going to have to look at three main types of resources. The human resources, that's the manpower. Do we have sufficient people to assist in terms of this particular type of hazard? Then we have, in terms of the other resource, which we are going to be looking at, will be tools and equipment. Do we have the particular kind of equipment? Do we have sufficient tools that would be needed in terms of dealing with places that are particularly prone to flooding? And then the third resource will be financial resources. In most instances, people will be reliant on the state. So that will be a big chunk of the budget that will have to go to looking at this particular area. Then we have inter and intra-jurisdictional cooperation. Now remember, I mentioned before, at the local level, you have the Ministry of Local Government, you have the 14 municipalities, and you have the DMU, who will handle what the situation is at a local level. When it gets into level 3, that's when the ODPM will now reach out to the other ministries, and in fact may reach out to external agencies to assist with dealing with the situation of preparedness or response. Then we have the conduct of exercises and drills. Now, all responding agencies should undertake at some point in time conducting exercises and drills and making sure that they are prepared to handle the impact of the flooding. But not only are they alone to conduct exercises and drills, they should involve the community in participating with them to ensure that everyone is on the same page and that they are prepared, either in terms of taking mitigation measures, some of the things that they have to do, or when they are impacted by the flood, what are some things that they should also do as well? And I believe that in one of the former presentations, you would have gotten some information on a personal level as to what are some things that persons will need to do. And finally, we look at writing a plan. Now, there is something called a paper plan syndrome. That's where we write the plan. You ask you for a plan, I prepare a plan. It stays in a drawer, collects dust, and never is seen. A plan is a living document. It means that that should be reviewed on an annual basis because things change. Look at the impact that we have now in terms of climate change. So it means that you have to look at your plan and make sure it covers an all hazards approach, not only flooding, but for all different types of hazards, so that when you do need to execute your roles and responsibilities, you know that your plan has been updated and then it can be rolled out into the community. So we move on to response. And what is response? Remember, response takes place after the disaster. And in the response, this is the assistance and intervention taken during or immediately after an emergency. And the focus is on saving lives and protecting community assets, which will be your buildings, the roads, the animals, crops, and infrastructure. Now, what are some things that's going to happen in the response phase? Well, we have the activation of emergency protocols. Remember those plans that I spoke to earlier? This is where these plans will now come into action. All plans will be activated. That includes plans by the ODPM and TEMA, as well as all the response agencies or all the other support function agencies that may be called to assist. The medical sector will be on high alert. All our hospitals and our health centers must be prepared to handle the influx of people that may come in due to injury. Then we have to look at the shelters and evacuation. Of course, the first responders will be responsible in terms of evacuating persons who may be marooned or trapped in their house. But the shelters will also be activated by the Ministry of Local Government in all the municipalities. And in search and rescue, this is where the action takes place. You're going to have all your first responding agencies collaborating together in this effort. You're going to have Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, you're going to have Trinidad and Tobago Police Force, and you're also going to have members of the regiment. And then we're going to look at secondary damage reduction. So it would mean that there may be areas who were not significantly impacted by the flooding, but before it gets any worse, they may want to take evasive action and either move out one time or start doing some things that will prevent any more extensive damage to their property. So now we get down to the actual agencies that are involved with a brief summary of some of their roles and responsibilities. We have the Disaster Management Unit, which we refer to as the DMU, and they are located in each regional corporation. In Trinidad, we have 14 regional corporations. So it means that you have 14 disaster management units throughout the country. Then the first responder in level 1 and 2 disaster, which I explained previously, and they collaborate with other first responders in providing local level assistance to citizens. They carry out activities in accordance with the disaster management policy of the Ministry of Local Government. Here again, we are looking at whatever the plans are for dealing with the situation. And then they educate community on all phases of the disaster management cycle. Not only what happens in preparedness and response, but they take them through all different levels so they will know what to expect and what to do. Then we have the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. They will provide expert disaster risk reduction advice to the municipal corporations and collaborate with other first responders. And then we have the Ministry of Work. They coordinate the national transportation support to responding agencies, ministries, and municipal corporations to ensure the effective utilization of all available transportation resources and systems during emergencies and disasters. And here you see that there is a neat and tight coordination between those 3 agencies, and they work very closely with each other. And we have one of the core and primary first responding agencies in Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, referred to it as the TTFS, and there's the coordination of national resources for search and rescue operations during an emergency and disaster. Remember, we are specifically looking at flooding here, but they are involved in all hazards. Every hazard you could think of that happens in the country, fire service is there. And they will then operate in the capacities of the municipal corporation. They will assist them in each municipal corporation. And the police service, another agency, another primary agency, will be in maintenance of law and order, because you know what happens in terms of flooding, and once places are left abandoned, you're going to have people looting, going into people's homes, removing their property. They will also be involved with search and rescue together with the fire service. And then, of course, they're going to have traffic and crowd control, because they would need to have clear paths. If you have resources, heavy equipment coming into this area, you would want to make sure that they are able to access and get in to be able to deal with the situation. And we have the Water and Sewage Authority, as referred to as WASA, responsible for developing and implementing and monitoring the water systems throughout the country to ensure that in the event of a disaster or emergency, that it is provided with an adequate water supply. Now, if we think in terms of flooding and as a result of it getting into people's homes or businesses, there's going to be a lot of cleanup that's needed. And yes, they are going to be there to respond, but they're also going to be working very heavily in terms of the recovery phase as well. The Ministry of Health, as I indicated before, they coordinate the disaster preparedness and management systems within the Ministry of Health and regional health authorities. So you're going to have your health center, your primary health centers within the different municipalities. You're going to have some of your hospitals in those areas as well. And all are going to be on high alert. GRMTT, which is the Global Medical Response of Trinidad and Tobago, they are going to be the ones providing the transportation for persons to the medical facility, and they are going to be assisting as many people as they can throughout both Trinidad and Tobago. And here now we come to volunteer organizations. They play a role as well, both in preparedness and response. They assist in shelter management, and they also provide first aid and distribution of food and supplies. Then we have the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. It's a formation of 4. The Defense Force, it consists of the regiment, the Coast Guard, the Air Guard, and reserves. And together, they contribute to land, sea, and air capabilities to the response efforts. The 1st Engineer Battalion of the regiment, again, they work closely with the Defense Force, they work together with police, they work together with the fire service, and they work directly with the ODPM in times of emergency and assist the police force, the fire service, with search and rescue, and with law enforcement. And here we have URP, the Unemployment Relief Program. I know many of you would probably think that URP did not play a part in emergency management, but they do, because they provide manpower and they support the communities in the aftermath of hazard situation. So too, there's the other agency that we are going to be seeing here now, CPEP, which is the Community-Based Environmental Protection and Enhancement Program. They provide personnel for cleaning of roads and the general sanitation of affected communities. And all of these, 2 in particular, URP and CPEP, they collaborate and work with each other. And this brings me to the end of my presentation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I kept you waiting this long, but I hope that in fact it was worth it. So on behalf of Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies and Emergency Management of Trinidad and Tobago, I thank you for participating with us this morning in observance of the National Disaster and Preparedness Month. I hope that the information that we have all shared with you, that you are able to take something from it, because guess what? The rainy season will be upon us come the 1st of June. So this is a good time for you to start to prepare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samru, for your presentation. And as you mentioned, sometimes Murphy law takes over. But as persons in disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction, we are always ready and thinking about unplanned events and ways that we can respond to it and recover from those situations, just as you did quite expertly. So we'd like to thank you for your presentation. At this time, we will invite questions from the audience. So audience members, please feel free to submit your questions online and it will be answered. So our first question for Ms. Piosoria, could you state what is the impact of unplanned developments on flooding in our country?
State the impact of unplanned flooding.
Unplanned developments, exploiting areas on flooding.
Well, I would say that I am not a planner. My expertise, I am not a planner in urbanization. However, in any situation, if you don't take into account futuristic long-term planning and expansion now, and I guess this is why we're in this situation today, and 90 years later after the fact of the first flooding, we're trying now to clean up. We're trying now to see what we can fix, because we did not have the vision, the long-term vision of where maybe Port of Spain would have led to, and what were some of the things that we would have had to deal with in today's world like global warming, climate change. Nobody ever thought we'd have to deal with a global pandemic. So just from a layman's perspective, if you don't plan, if you don't have long-term vision, if you don't have foresight, if you don't start talking together, all of the stakeholders, if you don't have that integrated approach to respond to the environment, then it's a recipe for disaster. I don't know, Colonel Williams, if he might want to say anything, or if we have any, we can open it up to the floor. If we have any planners, experts on the forum, it's lovely to have two-way dialogue and open it up. I would be happy, but that would be my take on it, on the impact. So as we can't reverse, but we have to work together to improve, fine tune, and make the best of what is happening now by bringing everybody and all the collective minds together to come up with the best solutions. And I know that there is a Society of Planners Association in Trinidad and Tobago. I really was hoping to, I tried to connect and so on so that I could have gotten some real understanding holistically, nationally from that association of planners. Where are we heading? What are the next steps? But unfortunately, I was not able to get a hold of them to provide that information. But it is a very good question. And if there are any specialists on, please feel free to interject.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to bring a slightly different approach to answering the question, in that if you think the question is the impact of unplanned development, well, let's think about what planned development means. Planned development means that our streets are wide enough, our houses are built to a certain measure of what's the word I want? There are certainly a certain measure of resilience to the impact of hazards. We'd also think about things like the size of our streets and size of our drainage and things like that. So if we take the reverse of that and we have development, human settlements, where the streets aren't wide enough, the drainage is not planned and adequate, then when we have heavy rainfall, it means that the drainage, the available drainage is likely to be inadequate to cope with the amount of rainfall on the one hand. And it also means that if the streets are of insufficient size, then it means that rescue cannot, especially vehicles might not be able to access certain areas because of the fact that the roads aren't adequate enough. In fact, the roads themselves might become might be damaged because of the impact of the flooding. So that one, in a very simple way, one can appreciate that planned development is always better than unplanned development when it comes to disaster risk reduction, including the risk of flooding. And that would be my short explanation.
Colonel Dave, I want to ask one question that kind of popped into my head. Would local government transformation assist in this process, would you think?
Yes, because
centralization.
Well, yes, because the local government authorities would be responsible, would have responsibility for the actual physical development within their jurisdiction. And therefore, they must do their best to enforce the development standards that apply nationally. So again, we're talking about houses being built, observing the necessary setbacks, roads being built with appropriate drainage, the challenge though is that when we talk to the road network, the road network is largely under the Ministry of Works and Transport. But it does afford an opportunity for the local government authority to at least be part, give some kind of oversight, or at least be aware of what it is getting, the kind of service it is getting from the ministry, so that it you know, if for some reason there is a concern about the quality of a piece of some public infrastructure that is being constructed, then hopefully some kind of conversation could take place, and the matter resolved to the satisfaction of both parties. So yes, there is still a role for the local government body to monitor, in some cases to enforce standards to ensure that development, physical development of that political and geographic space takes place at a particular level.
I'm thinking too that also unplanned development, we could also refer to the squatting and building on hillsides as well.
Right. Again, what do we see in squatter settlements? We see houses that are fragile. We see houses that are often jammed up against one another. We see a physical space where the road network is not up to standard. And so when those communities become impacted, should there be a need for a rescue vehicle to access a particular home? Inadequate road size or homes being too close together. For instance, somebody living in a squatter community might have a heart attack, right? A call will be made. GMRTT will respond. But if the vehicle cannot get right up to the residence, it means that time will be lost in having to transport the residents from their homes to where the vehicle is. So unplanned development is not desirable. Planned development affords a whole lot of advantages. And so unplanned development creates challenges for emergency response.
I can identify this with an actual scenario happening as we speak up Fort George. I actually drove up there, and I think it was last year that the roads are beginning to crumble.
There you go.
It's crumbling, and there's an actual parlor on the roadside that is leaning at almost a 45-degree angle directly above the hillside developments. It is quite scary.
So again, showing that unplanned development could actually put people at risk, even in the absence of an actual event. Because if you have erosion and landslides, correct. We can take another question.
I hope, Mr. Horn, that kind of helped with that question.
Yes, that was a comprehensive response to that particular question, because we understand the impact that unplanned developments will have when it comes to flooding and other types of emergencies. Another question coming in from Mr. Hamilton Watson is that who are the suppliers of flood dams and floodgates?
Okay. So I can directly answer to that question. I, for one, my company, Pods Marketing Mix, which was, it was established in 2004. Some of the very first product that we came out with was inflatable sandbags, which to date we continue to sell. They are used primarily, Tima is one of my biggest customers, and they stock those inflatable sandbags, which kind of replaces or is an alternative to traditional sandbagging. They're a little bit more costly, and it's not magic. You still have to have the knowledge and the willingness to put it down and deploy it so that it does what it's supposed to do. But we also have flood barrier systems Now, over time, flood barrier systems have evolved over a number of years, and the more recognized or certified, internationally certified flood barriers that are tried and tested against extreme flooding, high waters, tested under, and it's really engineered to withstand water loading. Those can be extremely effective. And so way back in 2004, 2008, we would have launched flood barriers, the very first flood barriers in the country. The costs have escalated so much that really and truly what the average household could have invested in back then has gone up so much, so that now more commercial sector are the ones who can afford these certified, globally recognized, certified flood barriers. So across the board, if you want really high quality barriers, because the level of flooding now is not 2 inches of water, you're talking about 3 and 4 and 5, 6 feet of water. In some instances, flood barriers cannot help you, depending on where you live and the level of water that you are dealing with. And so flood barriers may not work and will not work in those instances. If you have 3 and 4 feet of water that you need to keep out of your premises, you can look at those certified and internationally tested and approved barriers, but it comes at a cost, and you have to treat it as an investment, an initial upfront investment to your property, to your home. You have to, everything is an opportunity cost. Can I afford not to do it? Or do I look for alternatives and face the consequences? And there are alternatives on the local market with local manufacturers. You see some handful of local manufacturers outputting flood barrier systems. Whether they work over a long period of time, and they're a lot cheaper, a lot more affordable, but I'm not sure, I cannot say how long they would last, how much water they will keep out, etc., etc. So you do have options. The general public would have options. You can go for regular sandbags. You can go for self-inflatable sandbags, which is less labor intensive. You can go to locally manufactured panels that act as flood barriers, or you can look at more long-term, globally recognized flood barriers, but you have to be prepared to be prepared to put out that initial investment. So I hope that helps.
Yes, and I think it would be advisable for persons who live in these floodplain areas to look at those internationally certified flood barriers as an investment, because it doesn't matter the price they have to pay, they have to match it against what will be lost in terms of their property and the cost to recover. So it is best to invest the money up front. So I hope that persons look into what's marketing and invest correctly for their homes as part of mitigation measures. Another question coming in from Mr. Clinton Hendrickson. There are many factors that contribute to flooding in Trinidad and Tobago. What would the panel identify as the most critical in addressing this situation? So what is the most critical thing that must be addressed when dealing with flooding in Trinidad and Tobago?
That's a tough one, because it depends on what, where you sit or where you stand in terms of your job, might give you a different perspective. But I would say that given that a flood is essentially water leaving the confines of the waterway, right? Then the major contributor would be the fact that based on what we do in terms of our disposal of solid waste into our waterways, siltation, the lack of keeping the waterways as free from debris and other forms of obstruction. The fact that we don't do that we don't keep our waterways as clean as possible, that means that their capacity to contain the water is reduced. And to the extent that that capacity is reduced, it means that then the water has to go somewhere else, and that's why we get flood. And that would be one of the major reasons. So when we, and in addition to that, well, I guess it's an extension of the same idea. We have situations where the state is building banks or levees along the river courses, and then individual citizens are breaching those banks in order to access the more fertile lands next to the river. But it means that when the flood waters comes down the waterway, overflows the bank, right? The natural bank, it means that eventually the water will find its way through that gap that was created by somebody who wanted to get inside of the levee or inside of the bank. So, you know, there is that as well, but it all hinges on the capacity of the waterways to contain water. And once that capacity is reduced in any way, then it will contribute to flooding. And I would say that that's probably the major issue.
If I might, for me, you know, I've always sat and looked at from a different perspective. And while I agree with Colonel Dave, I always tend to believe it starts with me. And a lot of the problems too, we contribute, individuals, the citizens contribute to the problem. Yes, the state has its own problems, but we as a people, the culture change, the mindset that we have is one that needs to change. I see so many times where I'm driving and people just continuously wind down their windows. It gets me so angry, and pitch litter out of the window. And I say to myself, what does it cost you to keep that bottle or whatever you have to dispose of in your car until you get to a dustbin? Why do we have that mentality? I do not understand it. Why? And this for me is one of the biggest peeves, and which is why I felt so strongly about getting like-minded people together to start talking about these things. Our mindset as a people, the way we have our minds positioned. I ask myself the question, do we love our country or do we not? Who needs to live and coexist in this country that we have been blessed with? Who? It's us. It's us, the people of this country, have to be willing to say, I embrace, this is my responsibility too. This is not only the government's responsibility. This is my responsibility too. Let me see what I can do at home. First, let me see what I can do for myself, with myself, my mind. How do I perceive things and view things? Next, how can I make a step, one small step, by making a change or a difference in what I do? Whether I keep my garbage in my car or whether when I go in my community, I see something happening, I pull a trigger. Hey, guys, this is going down inside of here. I'm really not sure if this is the right thing, you know, all you think, could we do something about it? Take back our communities, get involved, help the local government, do your part. Everybody do your part. And this is why EMATT was formed in the first instance, to get conversations going, to get the citizens involved. Let us embrace what we have to face together. We can do it together. Not as a state problem, not as a councillor problem. It's part of my problem too. I live in here. My children, my grandchildren live in here. This is my community. I was given an entitlement of, you know, sharing this community with people. Let us get together again as neighbors and solve the problems of the community. I have seen so much selfishness in communities now. So for me, Dave, I share a different perspective and I place blame on me, so to speak, in some instances where I know, and I know my neighbor and the neighbor down the road, and somebody driving the car in front of me, or whatever it is, could make a choice. Come on now, guys, we could do better as a people. And this is not only in the field of disaster risk recovery. This is across every realm with the crime, with the whatever, right? So I'll pull it back again. I see it from a different perspective. Yes, all the drains, all the infrastructure, what have you, there are many different components. But I do see it from a different perspective, and I would like to appeal to everybody who's on this webinar from today. Make a difference. You know, encourage your children, your family, your whoever. Don't litter now, don't litter. If you see something that you can make a difference in the community, you know the community going on flood, you know neighbors, come to the community, what we doing? We have a plan, well you have a plan, well you know what the plan involved. Somebody take up the mantle and spread the information and get the fire going. We never knew EMATT would be where it is today, right? It just takes one. And once you lead by example, people are going to follow. And we need to embrace it, people. We need to come together. That's my take on it, Dave.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Persobia. Mr. Martin mentioned that planting trees in the northern range and cease unplanned buildings would help with reducing flooding. So that's a good idea by Mr. Martin there.
Yeah, agreed.
To bring in Dr. Samaru, there's a question for Dr. Samaru.
Yeah.
Why, when there's flooding in my community, I don't see ODPM?
And that is a very simple answer. As I mentioned before, ODPM is a coordinating and managing agency. So you will not see ODPM on the ground in the trenches, in tall boots and shovels and cleaning up, because they are coordinating. That will be left to the local government and the DMUs at level 1 and level 2. The ODPM has much more to do in terms of coordinating the efforts of all the agencies, even though they will, in level 3, they will reach out, their reach is far and wide. But at level 1, even the DMU and the local government, they will still be in touch with the ODPM in terms of for guidance, for support, for requests in terms of getting help and assistance. But their mandate is not to be on the ground. That's what you have all the other first responding agencies, some of whom, as I mentioned, work closely with the ODPM. They will be the ones on the ground responding. So if you are calling the ODPM to come out and clean up, you're calling the wrong person. You need to first call the DMU Regional Corporation. Now, in case you do not have access to the information or know it offhand, on the ODPM website, you can get all the information that you require. The contact information for each DMU, for the regional corporation, for all the first responding agencies and all the emergency numbers. So I hope that answers your question. And I see Dave standing by wanting to make a contribution. being a former director
And deputy
of ODPM. Dave?
No, Julie, I think, I mean, the central point is that the ODPM is not a response agency. The ODPM is a coordinating agency, and therefore, when the average citizen is affected by the impact of some hazard, what they want is a response. They don't really care where the response comes from and who is calling out who and who's coordinating with who. All they want to see is a response. And therefore, because ODPM is the National Disaster Office, they may think that, well, they're supposed to be here. Well, the short answer is no. The ODPM is not a response agency. There are first responders. To do that, the ODPM's role is to coordinate the response. Provide access to additional services as required. That is the short answer.
Thank Thank you very much for your response, Colonel Williams. And I think the misunderstanding may have come from probably back in 2009 leading up. ODPM had a campaign that was saying call ODPM. So I think it may have misled citizens into believing that they were the ones responsible for responding to that type of emergency and disaster situation. So moving on to another question from Mr. Damian Martin. He looks at why does this flooding problem seem to be exacerbated in Trinidad when compared to Tobago? Because Tobago don't seem to have the same type of flooding problem. What could the panel attribute to that phenomenon?
Well, if I may start off the conversation, looking at areas around me, you have to look at the unplanned housing development. I know we refer to it as squatting. I would want to put it as unplanned housing development, not to be offensive to anyone. Because besides the positioning of the houses in terms of the closeness, there's always inadequate drainage. You start off with one house and you may think something, or a 1 or 2 feet drain is fine. And then in next month or two, you see 15 houses with the same size of drain. And it keeps happening more and more to the point now that people are building not too far from me. They are building, they have built, they have constructed houses on the riverbed. And now what's going to happen? Come June, when it starts to flood, their house end up getting washed down the river. These are the same people who now the government will have to come and go and assist, because they're going to say that I need a grant, my house was washed away. But in the first instance, surely there must be an agency that would have known that these people should not be, in the first instance, building houses there. But what is done? Like Stacey, I have advocated, I have written to just about everybody about it. It's still there. So these are some things. And if you look at in other areas, if you look at some of the areas in Valencia, in terms of next to the riverbed, some of the areas in St. Joseph in Bangladesh, how long they said they were going to be relocating people from Bangladesh? Nobody has been able to do that. And these are things that contribute, because you start off with one house and then you end up with 50. And by the time it reaches the 50, everybody's afraid to move anybody. So that's my take on it.
But I do know definitely there is increasing intensity of flooding in Tobago in Scarborough. I know that for a fact. So over time, the nature of the beast, it is becoming more and more a problem, and TEMA has to respond and deal with it, especially in Scarborough. I know that for a fact. So the problem is there, and of course they have their community emergency response teams that go out to assist, but it's not that the problem doesn't exist. The problem does exist in Tobago.
Thank you very much for the answer from the panel. Another question: how often should communities conduct exercises to prepare for flooding?
To answer that question, Earl, communities will not just get up and decide that they're going to do drills. There has to be a driven force behind it. And I've always advocated through the DMU and the regional corporation, there are communities that they can get together and encourage people, because to get involved in doing an exercise and a drill in your community, unless you have subject matter experts to guide you, you will not know where to start. So it has to be a collaborative effort, getting subject matter experts together, like persons like yourself from fire service, getting people from the regional corporation and the DMUs, and getting people interested in looking at that as a way of making a contribution to their community so that if something happens, we have people who will be able to do that. Now, you will find that Ministry of Rural Development have been doing some online courses in terms of CERT for people in the community. But what really happens in terms of all of those persons when you really need them? So it just does not have to be something that you could just say, well, they should do training. You have to get the people committed. I mean, we refer to CERT in Tobago, but CERT in Tobago is of a different color because these are trained and highly qualified, persons. While people in Trinidad that you are going to train in terms of CERT, they are volunteers. Now you ask a further question. Is there a policy, and I'm not talking about a policy in draft, is there a policy that will safeguard persons who volunteer in terms of helping out in a disaster? This is something that people would want to know. If it is I volunteer and something happens to me, what happens? So you have to be able to explain to people all of these things and to get them involved, but at the same point in time, letting them know the limitations of their involvement. But communities will not just get up on a Monday morning without being motivated by somebody or some agency to do something. And the people will come out, but they need to have a push. They need to have somebody who will come to them and say, okay, let's do this. Because you have community groups all over Trinidad. So you don't have to look for groups. They have groups all over Trinidad. It's just in getting them involved in terms of saying, okay, we have this particular training that we want to offer you. Let's see how we could get people together.
I think too, Julie, stemming from that is recognizing that the trained people that we have at our disposal to assist with things like that work in the public sector. And so, really recognizing how many people we have who are trained up, who understand the business outside of the public sector that can, as you say, maybe be motivated to adopt a project in their community. And so, it's great that Cipriani has the program. I think it's a certificate or diploma in emergency management. And the more that we develop the skill set among the people and the more people going to pursue that type of education, that would be great, so that now you have more hands on deck with the capability and the expertise and the knowledge to probably be motivated to say, let me take up that mantle in my community in a better, more professional way.
Yeah, the final question for our panel. We oftentimes hear politicians say that they have the answer to flooding. In Trinidad and Tobago, excuse me, is flooding considered a natural or a man-made disaster, and could it be eradicated?
I suppose it's a combination of both, because again, we come back to our understanding of what flooding is. Flooding occurs when the water leaves the waterway. The water escapes the limitations of the waterway. In other words, some waterway overflows its banks. Or you could also have where, based on the natural flow of water on the ground, you get ponding, and that could also be a form of flooding. Does it occur naturally? Yes, if you live, or if there is an area, a geographic space that has heavy rainfall, then when the rain falls and there is runoff, the question is, does the available river system, is the capacity of the available river system sufficient to contain that runoff? If the answer is no, you're going to have flooding. But in addition to the natural capacity of waterways, right, and the fact that you will have siltation, in addition to that naturally occurring phenomenon, even if you had no human beings around, that will happen. But what makes it worse is when, based on the actions of human beings, because in addition to that natural siltation and erosion and the transporting of debris from higher up the river, you know, into more low-lying areas of the waterway, you have the additional problem of people disposing of waste into the rivers. So that the short answer is that flooding is, in fact, a result of both natural and man-induced or man-contributed causes. That would be my offering.
Thank you very much, Colonel Williams.
I would want to support Colonel with that, because I think we have such live examples in terms of to attribute man to some of it. Because when you look at when they're dredging the rivers, what do we see? We see more half a car, mattresses, you name it, everything else other than water. How did it get there? How did the half a car get any water? How did the mattress get any water? All of these things then we have to look at and say, well, okay, yes, we cannot prevent the rain. The rain will come. And yes, these days it's coming more than it used to be. But it means that we are, as humans, we are contributing significantly to flooding in this country. Significantly. And you just have to pass by when they are dredging a river and look and see what's coming out of there. You would believe somebody was actually living in the river. The amount of household items that are coming out.
But the truth is, some people actually do live in rivers.
Yeah.
I agree, because I have some examples of that. I said it before.
In the river and on the river banks.
So thank you very much for the response, because that should highlight to us that as human beings, we have a responsibility in our homes and our communities to mitigate the effects of flooding. Because whether we are there or not, flooding may occur, as Colonel Williams just explained. So thank you very much for that. At this time, I'd like to say, as we say, no more questions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions. And at this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Adriana Archer, who is a Program Dean for Security Administration and Emergency Management at the Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies, to give her closing remarks. Ms. Archer.
Thanks, Earl. Thanks very much. And let me say good morning to everyone present. And it is indeed my pleasure to bring some closing remarks to this national webinar that focuses on community resilience, working together to mitigate flood risk. So let me start by firstly thanking Mr. Sheldon Salino for deputizing as our director this morning for his opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Salino, for taking time off from your very busy, your very busy schedule to be with us here this morning. And again, to all the presenters who chose to share their perspectives on flooding in Trinidad and Tobago and how we can mitigate this problem. So thank you to Stacey-Ann. Stacey-Ann would have shared with us, that this flooding problem here in Trinidad and Tobago is like 90 years, 90 years old. The city of Port of Spain, she used as that example. She also enlighten us with respect to, developments on flooding, on a floodplain. She also spoke to where the city of Port of Spain is actually located on a floodplain at sea level. She shared some of the causes of that. She spoke about the meteorological, the hydrological, and the human, from which we just heard again. The human aspect is actually it actually plays the greatest role that we can think about in flooding. Julie talked about all those appliances and so forth, car parts and everything, that comes down the river. It comes from us, the humans, is the humans who actually put that into the river and causes, all this kind of, and causes the flooding. Stacey also told us about the impact on flooding, the social, the environmental, the physical, and of course the financial. So I would hope that the participants, you would have paid attention to the diagram that was shared that explained the complexity of all of this. Looking at the strategies that we ought to adopt as citizens of this country. And as she would have said, all hands must be on deck. So it's not only about the government or the role that the government may have to play, but it's actually every one of us, all citizens of this country. We must, share in ensuring that somewhere along the line, we could play a role in mitigating, flooding here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Colonel Dave, for your contribution. It was greatly appreciated. You gave us some statistics on rainfall. You spoke about the unpreparedness for flooding, and we would have heard coming out of some of the answers that you would have given that we always need a plan. We should always have a plan when dealing with flooding here in Trinidad and Tobago. But you brought it down to the level of the household. Preparedness at the level of the household. And you look to here at how can we mitigate flooding at that level. So you spoke about the location, for enacting or for building these different structures. And we hear about all these structures that would have been built on the riverbank. Julie just told us about one start with a small little drain, for the water to run off. And then we see 15 or 20, a whole development taking place there with that same small drainage. So of course, we're gonna have what? Flooding. So the location for erecting these structures is critical. It's important. You also told us about how to protect people and their assets, all right? And that video that you shared with us with respect to the use of the sandbags, and I believe you said that it's also available online, so persons could also, check online for that video. Very informative. There should also be a family emergency plan. Yeah, family themselves have to, have that plan as to how they could, or what they should do if flood should occur in their home. And flood insurance, I think that's a biggie for us here in this country, where most of us, or most persons, most citizens, they do not have that flood insurance, so they depend on the government to assist if their property, their furnishings, if it's damaged, during a flood, they actually depend on that sort of relief, that assist them. So flood insurance, yes, is important. So again, Colonel Williams, Colonel Dave Williams, retired, thank you very much for your presentation. It was greatly appreciated. And then my colleague spoke, Dr. Julie Samaru. Julie, thank you again too for sharing with us. You enlighten us with respect to the 4 phases of disaster management. You told us about, the loss from flooding, what items or what we could lose when flooding occurs. So we had the property, the agricultural sector, the commercial operations, and of course, the displacement of people. You also reminded us of the agencies, and you went into great depth, telling us all about these different agencies and their responsibilities when it comes to flooding. In terms of the coordinating, of all these different agencies. You outlined the roles and the functions. You broke it down into the levels, the different levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. And of course, the 2 main agencies, the ODPM and the TEMA, you would have shared their roles and functions, even again when answering that question that you did just a while ago. You saw preparedness as being critical again, like all our presenters. Preparedness is something that each and every one of you would have emphasized. You also looked at the threat assessment under preparedness, the resources that's required, the tools, the equipment, etc. There's also the financial resources, the cooperation between these different agencies. There must be that collaboration that exists between these all these different agencies, the drills, and of course the writing of that plan, whether it be at the level of the government or level of the family. We must always have that plan. And on the response you told us about that we need to focus, that the focus should be on saving crops, livestock, and of course, the protection of the community, the protection of those persons who reside in these different communities that are always prone to flooding. So again, I just want to say thank you to our presenters, Colonel Williams, Dr. Samaru, and Cipriani Surya, the acting vice president of EMATT. And with that said, I would like to take this time to say a hearty thank you to the Emergency Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago for choosing to partner and collaborate with the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies in making this national webinar a success. It has been an honor and a privilege working with you to ensure that the message of flooding and how it impacts us here in Trinidad and Tobago is heard throughout the country. We look forward to working with you again in the near future. And last but not least, thank you all to the different participants for taking the time from your schedule to be with us here this morning. Thanks for your questions, and I hope that the answers would have brought clarity and understanding as it pertains to flooding. Thank you very much to our moderator, Mr. Earl Horn, always doing a good job as usual. Thank you, Earl, for taking time off from your work, your schedule, to be here with us this morning. And I know that you have a passion for emergency management. So thank you very much, Earl, for being here with us this morning. Thank you all.
It was a pleasure, Ms. Archer, likewise, and we're happy to collaborate as much as we can. So,
Yes.
I think this is a great stepping stone to many great things. I hope that the messages that we shared would have impacted on the people on this platform, at least one. And I thank Kashiba for making it an all-inclusive event.
I forgot. Sorry, my dear, I did forget you.
Because we have to think about persons with disabilities. They cannot be left out of the equation. They have every right to this country just as we do, and we must think about them and the effects of the people with disabilities as it relates to disaster risk reduction as well.
Yes. And before we close, let me just mention that at the college, Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, we do offer a certificate program in emergency management. We offer a diploma in emergency management, and we also offer an accelerated certificate in disaster management and preparedness. And all this could be found on our website, www.cclcs.edu.tt. Okay, thank you again. Earl, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Archer, for your closing remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, this has brought us to the end of a wonderful event dealing with flood management. And I hope that the information shared today will be taken with each person, share with your family members, share with your friends, as we continue to work towards making our communities more resilient to flood and other emergencies. So thank you very much, and you all have a wonderful day. This is the end of our program.